What's up, y'all? I am going to get right into our conversation today. I am going to be talking to you about 3 questions that you need to be asking yourself as you are engaging in this work of anti-racism. I'm Monique Melton, and if you're new here, welcome. If you've been following me for a while, welcome back. I am a combination of things. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm also a anti-racism educator, I'm a coach, I'm also a published author, international speaker. The focus of my work is to support and do the work and to provide tools and resources for folks who want to engage in anti-racism so they can learn how to identify racism and eliminate it. All of my classes, all of my experiences are designed to give the participants the language, the courage, as well as the confidence to know how to identify racism, but also how to eliminate it. And today we're going to talk about 3 questions you need to be asking yourself. Now, I have some ground rules whenever I'm teaching that I like to share, but we're not going to get into those today. I will invite you and encourage you and suggest and highly recommend that you listen to the podcast episode that is titled Ground Rules, so that you can have a better sense of understanding where I'm coming from as an educator and the way that I teach. It's also important to understand that every educator is different. Everyone's ground rules are going to be different. And so honoring and respecting those ground rules for that particular educator is really important. Okay, with that said, let's get to it, y'all, because you're here to learn, right? All right, so when it comes to anti-racism, it's really important to know that this work is ongoing work. This isn't work that you just decide to do on Monday and then maybe you'll do it next week. Maybe you'll do it when you feel like it. So when I'm talking and teaching to folks about anti-racism, I always like to emphasize how important it is to commit to the long haul, long-term journey, the consistent everyday work of anti-racism. And with that part being said, it's important to know that there's a framework when it comes to anti-racism. There's a way to engage in this work. There's a way to do this work so that it is most effective versus a very haphazard approach. A lot of people get started in this work where they maybe read a book from an author, or maybe they've read some articles and some podcasts, and that's been the extent of it. And that's how you piece together the anti-racism, which that can help you for sure. You're gonna learn, you're gonna grow, but if you're wanting to do something and be most effective, and you want to do something that's going to allow the greatest impact, which that's my hope, then you're going to want to make sure that you understand the framework for the thing that you're actually doing. You're going to want to understand how it all comes together so that you can engage in the work to the fullest of your potential. It's no different than anything in life. So if you're thinking about in the kitchen and you're cooking, if you don't know that when you're cooking meat that it should be cooked to a certain temperature and you're just in there cooking chicken the same way you cook beef, it can cause damage. Sure, you can learn along the way, you can make some mistakes and learn from those mistakes, but you can avoid some of that when you learn actually the art and the science behind what you're doing, the framework behind what you're doing. So that's why I want to give you 3 questions to think about as you're engaging in this work, because these are questions you want to be asking yourself daily. These are questions that you want to be engaging with daily. Okay, so the first question is, am I making this about me? When I say, am I making this about me, I'm directing this to a white person, someone who benefits from white privilege. Am I making this about me? That is a question you want to ask yourself, because that question will help you identify if and when you are centering whiteness, which is the contrary, the exact opposite of what we're actually trying to do in the work of anti-racism. When it comes to anti-racism, the goal is to center people of color. And there's a nuance to that in some degree, but it's actually not that nuancy. It's important that you ask yourself this. And as you're asking this question, some follow-ups to help you be honest with your answer here is to pay attention if you're looking for ally cookies. Okay, so ally cookies, I don't know who originally coined the term, but I like it a lot. I like cookies, I just don't like ally cookies. Ally cookies is basically when you are looking for praise, you're looking for acknowledgement or recognition for any and all, regardless of how minimal or how grand of the effort is that you're doing in the work of anti-racism. And when you don't receive it, that often you will either feel rejected, you might throw a fit, you might get angry, you might decide that people aren't going to appreciate it, I'm just going to stop. And so processing those type of questions and identifying those type of things can help you also get to the root of some of the implicit bias that you're still operating from. And so if you may be operating from the bias that you are doing anti-racism work because you are engaging in a cause for people of color, you're doing this to make yourself feel better because you are doing things that aren't necessarily your responsibility, but you're going above and beyond because you want to help people of color. And so that can lend also into white saviorism. And so instead of looking for ally cookies, instead of looking at this from a place of I'm engaging in a cause, I'm doing a cause, you instead want to work as an accomplice, someone who is fully committed and takes full responsibility for their part in the work. But one of the ways to help you understand if you are looking for ally cookies is if you are centering yourself, if you're centering your motives, if you're centering your intentions, if you're centering your comfort or your desires, you're centering the need to be recognized, to be acknowledged. This can be something as simple as when perhaps you decide that you want to send a person of color money, just saying thank you for what you do. Sending that to them, that can be a great gesture. That can be a way of participating in reparations. But if you feel like you need to then send that person an individual note saying, hey, I sent you this and just want to let you know. And so doing that extra mile is looking for, you have to ask yourself, why did I do that? Am I looking for recognition? Am I looking for praise? Am I looking for acknowledgement? Because if you're doing it for yourself, you're going to be looking for that. If you're doing it to center people of color, if you're doing it for the progress of people of color, and that's the sole purpose, you don't need to be recognized. You don't need to be acknowledged. You don't need to be praised for that. Another way to help you with this question is, am I making this about me? Is if you are engaging in very external efforts. And so that means you're doing things so that others can see, others can identify. This is why it's so important that you are very mindful when it comes to things like calling yourself an anti-racist. I talk a lot about that as well in my program, in that the goal is not to be an anti-racist, but to engage in anti-racism. It's not an identity, it's an action. It is something you do on an ongoing basis. And so to identify yourself as an anti-racist, for me, that's a red flag. That's a red flag to me because that tells me that's someone who is dipping their toes in exceptionalism, which means that they have spots and they have areas and perspectives that they're not even allowing themselves to dig in and get close to because they perceive themselves as being ahead of the game, the exception to the rule, someone who is a good white person. Another way to help you with this question is, am I making this about me? Is, are you centering your feelings or your intentions over the impact that your decisions or your behavior or other decisions and behaviors of other white people have had and the impact that it's had on people of color? Asking yourself this question and asking yourself, am I amplifying, am I centering, am I focusing on people of color here and how this has affected them, how this will affect them, how this is affecting them, or am I focusing my attention on the white person, whether that be you or another white person, so the projection of white innocence and white allegiance can show up when you're answering this question honestly. Okay, this is a question, and if you come to being honest with yourself and you identify that, wow, I am making this about me, what do you do? I'll tell you that in a second. Let me just say this really quickly. When it comes to asking these questions, it is no good if you're not honest. It's also no good if you add shame. If you shame yourself for feeling the way you feel, if you shame yourself for being honest, then you're going to retreat and you're going to move back, and you're going to move back from the work. Which, who does that help? It only helps you. Again, so you're centering yourself even more. And who does that hurt? Who does that put in greater risk and greater jeopardy because you're not doing the work? People of color. One way to help you with this, am I making this about me, is asking yourself a question. How can I amplify a person of color here? How can I center a person of color here? What would it look like to make my attention and my focus on the pain that a person of color has expressed or is experiencing and the progress that is desired? How can I do that? What's one step I can take towards that? It's a very simple shift. It's a very simple shift that is a very powerful shift. And so a lot of times people really struggle with moving out of that stuck place because they're afraid. They are nervous about what this might mean about them, if they have these thoughts, they have these feelings and all of that. But if you're afraid of making mistakes to hurt people of color, but yet you are afraid to learn how to correct those mistakes, then aren't you only going to continue to make mistakes, which refutes and negates the ideology that you have that you're afraid of hurting people of color if you don't want to even learn how to stop hurting people of color? So this is why, again, it's very important to center people of color in this work and move past your discomfort, move past your fears, and do this work. Okay, so the second question to ask yourself. So the first question is, am I making this about me? Those are some, and then I give you some prompters to think about with these questions to help you process that. The second one is, am I maintaining white privilege? This is a really important one. You have to understand that white privilege is something that you're born into, okay? Just like I'm born Black and I am born into Blackness, and that has come with its own set of distinct and unique experiences because of white supremacy, because of whiteness. You being born white and identifying as a white person comes with a set of privileges. And to deny those privileges is incredibly irresponsible. To work to dismantle a system that gives you those privileges is the goal. And so if you are doing anti-racism and you're believing that, oh, okay, I'll just use my white privilege for good, then you are going to maintain white privilege. You're going to maintain the system of disproportionate power distribution. You're going to maintain a system of oppression by trying to use something that is inherently toxic, that is toxic by design. There's no good that comes out of it. So there's no different than if I give my child a glass of water and throw a little bit of poison in it and say most of the poison is gone, but there's a little bit left in there. Go ahead and have a sip. No, because there's still poison there and it's still toxic and it's still going to cause harm. White privilege is still toxic. It's still poison. It's going to cause harm. Despite all the things that you're trying to do with it and you think that are to the benefit, I'm giving my child a glass of water to hydrate them and to help them, but there's still poison in it. So it's still going to hurt them. May not be as much poison in it, but it's still going to cause harm. And so we have to understand that by trying to use white privilege for good, all that is basically saying is that I understand that white privilege is bad. I appreciate that you told me that. I like these benefits, so I'm going to use a little bit of my privilege to help you, but I still want to maintain my position of power and dominance. And so to imagine that we're going to shift from that means that we're going to have to shift positioning. We're going to have to shift power dynamics. We're going to have to shift money, time, comfort, and ease. And so this is why I talk a lot about this, my stories, how incredibly frustrating it is as a Black woman to see and hear from so many white women telling me that they want to do this work. And then when I present opportunities to do this work, whether it be an opportunity that is complementary, whether it be something that you have to invest in, and there are numerous amounts of levels to the investment, there's a ton of excuses that come up. There's a ton of excuses of, I don't have time, I don't have the money, I need to focus on the kids right now, or I need to do, there are so many excuses that come up that basically send the message to me that I realize that I'm harming you, but it doesn't bother me enough to want to stop. I realize that I contribute to a system that is oppressive, but it doesn't affect me enough to actually want to change. And so that type of realization and understanding that and realizing that a lot of times people are more inclined to say that, yeah, I want to do something, but when presented an opportunity to do something, all sorts of resistance come up. And a lot of it has to do with wanting to maintain these power dynamics. And that's the truth that we have to really get at. Because if you've been in a position of power, you've been in a position of dominance, you've been in a position of superiority, despite you realizing how problematic that is, there is still some sense of comfort that comes with that, and some sense of wanting to maintain the status quo that comes with that. And so you have to do the work within yourself to dismantle that so that you can actually actively engage in the work. But if you're trying to maintain white privilege while you're doing this work, it is not going to result in equity for people of color. It's not going to result in that. It's going to result in the same power structures that we have right now. So that's why I encourage you often to make sure that you are doing the work within and then extending that work outward. But if you're engaging in just that external, that often lends into tokenism or performative allyship, that is a key indication that you are trying to maintain same power dynamics. Why a lot of times we see the resistance for change and we see a lot of pushback for that. And I'm going to go into all that here, but I just want to say that I want to invite you to think about that. I want to invite you to think about, why do you believe that you try to maintain power dynamics, maintain the current system, and don't believe that you're the exception. Please don't do that, because the moment you believe that, the moment that you miss an opportunity to learn and to see something within yourself that causes harm to people of color. All right. So the third question is, am I being led by people of color? White people, y'all have got to stop believing that you need to lead everything, including a movement that is about dismantling white supremacy. White people should not be in the driving seat for that at any time. Not at any time. And I've talked about this before, and it's really important that we understand that how are we going to shift power dynamics? How are we going to shift power dynamics if we maintain the same power dynamics? It doesn't make any sense. Asking yourself, am I being led by a person of color? This will allow for you to unpack a lot of your implicit bias, because I know for me, there are a lot of people who show up in my DM, in my messages, that say problematic things to me, and I can tell that they're not used to communicating with a person of color. They're not used to communicating with a Black woman. And so a lot of their own implicit bias show up, and they begin to engage and interact from those places, which is oppressive and violent towards me. So it's really important that you begin to condition yourself to humanize people of color by being led by them and allowing yourself to be in a place where you aren't the one who has all the answers. No person of color has all the answers. But if you look at our society, and you look at all the different places perhaps you've learned from school and education, from what's on TV, what's in media, what's in leadership and jobs and politics, if you see that the majority has always been white, that right there is going to send a strong signal and a message to you that white is right. White should be in authority. White should be in leadership. White is something to be respected, to be revered. And anything other than that is going to be looked down as less than, looked down as inferior or subpar. And so if you want to shift that implicit bias and that conditioning, you're going to have to put yourself in and maintain a position where you are being led by people of color. That's going to help you to begin to develop a greater sense of respect, help you dismantle some of the stereotypes that you have about people of color. And it's also going to help you be able to get the perspective of this movement from the very people who are experiencing the suffering in this movement. White people cannot experience racism, so they can't speak to these experiences with authenticity. The things that they're sharing is going to be just regurgitated information that they've heard from a person of color. So what does that do? That is just exploitive of our experiences and for the benefit of appearing for them as the exceptional good white person who has somehow achieved this place in this position where they now should be leading other white people. That is not what should be happening. Okay, so staying in your lane is really important, and understanding that as you are being led by people of color, even if the content that you're reading, even if the experiences that you're attending or things like that, even if any of that stuff, there's no cost associated to that, you still need to be investing in the work. And there are a number of ways to do that, whether that be supporting the products or services that they offer, whether that be sending them a compensation for their time and effort via PayPal or Venmo or whatever the thing may be. May it be supporting a nonprofit that they share with you that they're really passionate about. Your support in this work has to go beyond you showing up and learning from them. You have to take action in what they're doing and also pay and compensate for that, because that is allowing for you to shift these power dynamics, redistribute power, because that's what anti-racism is. And that's also going to position you into a place of being consistent in reparations. And so I can go into a whole thing about this, but to sum that last part up, being led by people of color should not only be listening to and following them on social media or listening to their podcasts or sharing them. It should also be coupled with compensating them. You should not, by any means necessary, only consume from all people of color, consume and never contribute financially, even if it's just a few dollars. Everyone's financial situations are different, but if you have spent your whole journey of anti-racism consuming free content, you have to ask yourself, why aren't the women or men or how they identify deserving of being compensated financially for their labor and their time that they're putting into that? Again, you're trying to recondition, you're trying to condition to humanize people of color. And so a lot of times the belief or operating from the place that a person of color isn't deserving of that, that their time isn't worthy or deserving to be valued, operating from those places are very dehumanizing, but is what you've been conditioned under with white supremacy. So to replace that with something that is more humanizing and affirming to the dignity and the humanity of a person of color would be to, one, respect their time, respect their boundaries, participate in the things that they're doing, and to compensate them for their time. It doesn't only mean that. You don't only do that, but that is a part of the work. Okay, so I want to recap it really quickly. 3 questions you should be asking yourself daily as you're engaging in this work. So the first question is, am I making this about me? Second question is, am I maintaining white privilege? And the third question is, am I being led by people of color, and am I compensating them for their work? Okay, y'all got it? Yes, y'all got it. Awesome. All right, so that's it for today. So if you identify with any of these, if you're like, you know what, I definitely want to better equip myself so that I'm building a practice in this work, join the community. It's super easy to join. Okay. Thank you so much. Again, remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being here. And as always, keep shining brighter together.